All right, let's dive in. Today, we're taking a deep look at the modern women's collegiate lacrosse athlete. It's one of the fastest growing sports out there for sure. But behind all that incredible speed and skill is a hidden story, a story of unbelievable physical demand. So we're going to dig into the data and see what it really takes to compete at this level. First, just to give you an idea of that growth we're talking about, it's huge. In the last 40 years, the number of NCAA women's lacrosse teams and the players on them has absolutely exploded by more than 350%. So with that kind of crazy growth, you've got to ask the big question: what's the real physical price these athletes are paying? Because as the game has gotten faster and more competitive, the demands on their bodies are just more intense than ever before. Okay, so let's zoom all the way in. Let's start by looking at what an athlete actually goes through inside just one 60-minute game. And trust me, the numbers here are pretty staggering. During a single match, a player runs, on average, 4,733 meters. Now, to put that into perspective, that's nearly 3 miles. And think about it, you're doing all of that while carrying a stick, dodging opponents, and tracking a tiny ball.
And yeah, this is not some casual jog around the park. Woven into those 3 miles are, get this, an average of 124 separate sprints per game.
On top of that, you've got about 51 high-intensity accelerations. You know, those are the explosive bursts from a near standstill to chase down a loose ball or just blow past a defender. And for every action, there's a reaction, right? Matching those bursts of speed are an average of 38 high-intensity decelerations. And let me tell you, those are the real muscle shredders, the punishing, hard stops and sharp cuts that really define the game today.
So, the researchers behind this really hit the nail on the head. The game is just this relentless, brutal cycle of high-intensity effort. It's not just about endurance, it's about being able to generate explosive power over and over again.
But here's where it gets really interesting. Not everyone on the field is doing the same amount of work. Just look at this breakdown. Midfielders and attackers are shouldering a way heavier load. I mean, attackers perform nearly double the sprints of defenders, and midfielders, they cover more than twice the high-intensity distance. It's wild.
Okay, so that's one game. But how on earth do you manage that level of intensity over a whole season without players just, breaking down? How do teams keep everyone healthy and playing at their best?
Well, a huge part of the answer comes down to this really cool metric sports scientists use called the acute chronic workload ratio, or ACWR for short. It sounds complicated, but the idea is actually pretty simple. It just compares the work you've done recently, like in the last week, to what your body has gotten used to doing over the past month.
The easiest way to think about it is like a physical budget for an athlete's body. If that ratio drops below 0.8, they might be undertrained and not ready for a big game. But if it shoots past 1.5, whoa, they're in the red. That's the overtraining zone, where the risk of fatigue and injury just skyrockets. The sweet spot is right in that window.
And what's so cool is that the research shows that lacrosse programs are, for the most part, nailing this. Even with all the natural ups and downs in training intensity over a long season, they're successfully using this data to keep their athletes right in that optimal performance zone.
So managing the on-field work is one huge piece of the puzzle, but it's only half the story. What happens off the field is just as crucial. And that brings us to the most critical and honestly, the most overlooked factor: recovery.
Now, you would think that these super fit athletes are also amazing sleepers, right? It just makes sense. But the data tells a totally different story. A major study found that a staggering 52%, that's more than half, of all elite athletes are actually classified as poor sleepers.
Which just begs the question, why? Why are some of the most finely tuned people on the planet struggling so much with something as fundamental as getting a good night's sleep? Well, the research points to a couple of key culprits. First is something called sleep onset latency, which is just a fancy way of saying how long it takes to actually fall asleep. The second is the athlete's own perception of their sleep quality. And what's really telling here is that the study found that athletes in team sports and female athletes, a perfect match for our lacrosse players, tend to report taking longer to drift off. So, we've looked at the game, the season, and even the bedroom. What's the big takeaway when we put all of this data together? What does it all really tell us? It all comes down to this. You have to look at the full 360-degree athlete. Performance isn't just about the micro-level explosion you see in a single game. It's about the meso-level management over an entire season. And all of that is built on the macro-level foundation of well-being, where things like recovery and sleep are absolutely paramount.
And this leaves us with one final and, I think, really important thought. As we get better and better at measuring everything, every sprint, every stop, every hour of sleep, the real challenge becomes, how do we use all that data to not just build a better athlete, but to better support the human being behind all those incredible stats?